Welcome to the Brothers and Sisters Like These podcast. I'm your host, Brother Emiliano. Today we have with us our guest, Chaplain Phil Kramer, retired military chaplain. Phil, welcome to the show. How are you?
Man, I'm doing great, brother, and it is a pleasure to see you once again after many years.
Absolutely. It really is. So just for the viewers to understand, the chaplain and I served in a same unit, both stateside and then overseas. One of them was a long 15-month deployment during the GWAT period, really counterinsurgency, so kind of really tough fight there. And he was instrumental in our mental and moral and even physical well-being. Was a captain at the time, and it's amazing and it's a privilege and it's an honor after what we've been all through so much before and after those experiences to really be here together with all our fingers and toes, and to be able to have each other's company is really a blessing. And I'm really feel fortunate that our paths have crossed and that I'm here today talking to you again.
Absolutely.
So I like to always start off with a little bit of an origin story. Would you mind sharing with the listeners your personal origin story?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born and raised in a small town called Lake Wales in Florida, Central Florida, about an hour south of Orlando. Grew up in a blended family, so my mom and my dad had both been married previously and both brought children into the family. I was the one child that was born out of their relationship. There were some tensions that go along with being in a blended family, as well as the fact that my dad was an alcoholic, and that definitely put a real downer on our family atmosphere over the years. But nevertheless, my parents still remained married throughout my growing up years. They got divorced later. But so there was at least that degree of stability in my home growing up, the fact that I had both mom and dad present. Probably the most important thing that happened to me when I was growing up was when I was 17 years old. I put my personal faith and trust in Jesus Christ and began what I would call a vibrant relationship with him. So that was 35 years ago this month. I'll be 52 at the end of this month. So 35 years ago this month, life-changing experience. And everything in my life is ultimately defined by that relationship. So graduated high school in 1991 and wanted to serve our country. So I enlisted in the Marine Corps, and I did 4 years in the Marines. Probably my most notable time of service was I spent 2 years up at Camp David, which is where the president goes in the weekends. You know, it's in the mountains of Western Maryland. And it was pretty cool. I was there for President Bush the senior, and then also for Bill Clinton, President Clinton. And then got out of the Marines and felt like God was calling me to full-time ministry. And of course, a call to ministry is a call to prepare. And so I went to college in North Carolina. Then I went to seminary down in New Orleans, went back to North Carolina to Duke University to do another master's degree, and then ultimately went to Chicago to a place called Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, where I was doing a PhD up there in theology and New Testament studies. Well, as I was wrapping up that degree, because I'd been a professional student for 10 years, the war kicked off, meaning the war in Iraq, and then of course Afghanistan was already on the radar. And I felt like God was saying there's no better time to be a chaplain than when we're at war. And so I had a friend who was the brigade chaplain for the 504th, which was 1st Brigade of the 82nd. And he said, man, if you want to come and be a chaplain and come jump out of planes, we can make that happen. And so I basically went to chaplain school and then went to the 82nd Airborne Division, where, of course, you and I met. And we had some very interesting conversations, as I remember, over the years. But I did 5 years in the 82nd. And then I went to 3rd Ranger Battalion. The Army sent me to Ranger School and all the rest, and then I went to serve as chaplain with the Rangers. Between those two jobs, Fort Bragg and then Fort Benning, went to Iraq and Afghanistan 9 times. So spent a lot of time overseas, of course, most notably, as you mentioned, the 15-month deployment that you and I did together. I served, after that, I served 2 years at the Pentagon in the Office of Chief of Chaplains. And then went back to Ranger Regiment, and I was the regimental chaplain, so I was basically the head chaplain for the Army Rangers. And then my last assignment as an Army chaplain was I went out to be the head chaplain for Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade, which is basically where they do the Ranger School and the Airborne School.
Okay, not 507.
Which was a tremendous experience, and that was back at Fort Benning as well.
Yeah.
So basically I spent 4 years in the Marines, then I had about 9 or 10 years of broken time, and then I spent 16 years active duty in the Army. So retired at the very end of 2019, early 2020. Again, originally from Central Florida. However, we felt strongly that God was leading us to move to Arkansas, where I was the lead pastor for a church called Crossgate Church in Hot Springs, Arkansas, for 5 years. And then about a year ago, God really began to stir our hearts about coming back to Central Florida. As you may know, Central Florida is absolutely exploding with population growth right now. All kinds of people are coming and moving here. The county where we're originally from, Polk County, is right now, percentage-wise, the fastest growing county in the entire United States.
Oh, wow.
And so we basically moved back to Central Florida in December, and now we are in the early phases of starting a new ministry and a new work here in the area of Lake Wales, Florida. And so that's kind of my scope of terrain and my life in a nutshell.
Yeah, in a nutshell is well said, Brother Phil. So I wanted to quickly touch about a few things in your military career, and then there's some things I want to talk about post-military. So just for the viewers to remember that chaplains are unarmed. Could you speak to that just briefly as to the logic and the theory behind it?
Well, the idea is that chaplains are non-combatants, meaning that we don't bear arms. There's a couple different reasons behind that. One is so that if we are captured, then we are, at least in theory, supposed to be given non-combatant status, which allows us to minister to our fellow POWs in a way that goes above and beyond, say, if an infantryman or a pilot was captured. Another idea as well is that chaplains are supposed to be ministers of peace. And so in many people's minds, it seems a little contradictory that a minister of peace would be running around carrying a weapon on the battlefield, whether for offensive or even defensive reasons. So those are just a couple of the reasons why chaplains historically have been described as non-combatants.
Well, I find it very telling that even in the periods of GWAT that were high intensity, that the Army and its chaplains were still able to maintain that way of life and that philosophy. I think that's a big testament to your professionalism and the professional of your MOS. I remember that you went to Pathfinder School you were already in Ranger Regiment when you did that?
Yeah, so one of the great things about about being a chaplain in the Army is that the Army expects you as a chaplain to really embed yourself in the culture of whatever unit you're assigned to. So case in point, if you go to the 82nd Airborne Division as a chaplain, you're going to jump. They're going to send you to airborne school because you would not have credibility, right, with paratroopers. If you're not jumping, you're just a dirty, nasty leg, in Army speak. And so you'd have no credibility. Same thing for jump master school. I remember when our battalion commander at the time, Colonel Brian Drinkwine, called me in and said, "You're going to jump master school next week, and is the expectation in our unit that no officer will fail a school that he attends?" I said, "No pressure," right? So they sent me to jump master school. Again, it's all about credibility and making a contribution, right? Because yes, you should be able to make a contribution spiritually as a chaplain, but the expectation is you're going to make a contribution even outside of that. So here I am, I'm doing jump master inspections, I'm pulling jump master duties. Okay, so then I go to Ranger Regiment, and the Pathfinder School was right down the street from my battalion at Fort Benning. And what happens is a lot of times as a chaplain, you're at the casualty collection point or this administrative control point for the entire operation. And guess what? They're bringing in helicopters, they're bringing in supplies, medevacs, and all the rest. And believe it or not, yes, even a chaplain at that casualty collection point, if he's Pathfinder qualified, he's going to be able to make a contribution. He's not just going to be sitting there twiddling his thumb saying, "Let us pray," right? As important as that is. So it was a super easy sell when I talked to my boss and said, "Hey sir, I'd like to go to Pathfinder School down the street. I feel like I could bring those skills back and what I do at the casualty collection point." So again, what I love about the Army chaplaincy is you truly are embedded with your people. And going to Ranger School, I mean, again, if you show up at the Ranger Regiment and that's the basic mark of a leader at Ranger Regiment, is that you have gone to Ranger School. So all of it plays into, your role, your ministry, your credibility.
Absolutely. And remembering, were you and your chaplain assistant, which is an enlisted, in the 82nd? I remember you guys were the only two that were Ranger qualified in the Army or in 82nd.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting. Of course, the 82nd Airborne Division is all about its propaganda, but really what happened is my chaplain assistant, because every chaplain has an enlisted soldier, as you mentioned, who serves alongside of him in what's called a unit ministry team. And the chaplain assistant has many different roles. One, he is armed, so he's supposed to kind of be my bodyguard in a sense.
Yep.
But he does a lot of the administrative things as well. Well, anyway, I don't know, I guess I'd been at the 82nd about 9 months or so, a year, and a young guy, he just came out of high school, 18 years old, came to the unit as the new chaplain assistant, and we started talking about professional development. And he said, "I'd like to go to Ranger School." I said, "I think you should go. Why not? You're motivated. Let's do everything you can to advance in your career." At the same time, he also expressed an interest in going to West Point. And so he actually put an application in before he went to Ranger School to go to West Point. Well, he goes to Ranger School, he makes it, he comes back, so now he's got his Ranger tab on his shoulder, right? Well, then he got accepted into the West Point, what's called prep school. And that means, you're an enlisted soldier, and now you're going to go to this school for a year where they get you ready academically to go to West Point. And so that was basically a 5-year proposition, 1 year at the prep school, 4 years at West Point. And my man shows up to West Point with a Ranger tab already on his shoulder. So he's like big man on campus from day one.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so supposedly when he got his Ranger school completed and I completed mine, we were the only unit ministry team in the entire United States Army, conventional Army anyway, that had both been to Ranger school. That was kind of cool.
Absolutely, it was very cool. I'm very proud of him for
and
us.
By the way, he's flying Black Hawk helicopters today.
Okay, as a warrant officer or as an officer?
Commissioned officer.
Right. So he went through and.
Yeah, he graduated West Point
yeah.
and became a lieutenant and just did his officer time.
Yep. Wow, good for him. Other thing is that I remember about chaplains would have a field communion pack, and I just thought it was interesting that that's gone on since at least Vietnam, maybe before, but that I'm aware of in Vietnam, and that's something that's still carried even during your service, right? Something that you can take into the field.
Oh yeah. It's just a little tiny box, and you can put it in your rucksack when you jump out of an airplane. The first time I ever used my field communion kit in a combat zone was when we went on that short deployment to Afghanistan. And I know you guys were over Medterlam, but I was over in an area called Zermatt, and I was with a Bravo company of the same battalion. And we literally had a church service, and I used an old Russian anti-aircraft gun as my altar. I just had a little shelf on it, and I put my little communion kit right on top of this Russian anti-aircraft gun from when the Russians were in Afghanistan years before. And we just, because that's what you do when you're an Army chaplain. I mean, every day is Sunday in a sense, yeah. and anywhere, anytime you could say, hey, it's time to have chapel, mission dependent.
Absolutely. I've seen the ammo crates used and whatnot. So moving on to your post-military time, first of all, I was hoping that you'd be the first general officer chaplain that I knew of. So you let me down by retiring, but that's okay. I forgive you. And so post-military, you've written 3 books. Could you talk about each one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I actually wrote when I was, the first 2 actually I wrote when I was on active duty. The first one that I got published was a book on chaplain combat history in the United States Army. And I wrote that as a part of my graduate program at the Army Command and General Staff College. But it won Best History Thesis the year I was there. And so not only did I win a special little trophy, but I got a $500 cash prize, and the Army published the book. So it has since gone out of print, but it is available for a PDF download for free now. And you can share that link with your viewers later on. But that book was called The Proximity Principle. And it was talking about how in Army doctrine and in Army history, chaplains have served best and they've been most effective when they are in close physical proximity to their soldiers. And I give a ton of historical vignettes from the Civil War all the way up to Grenada, I feature several different chaplains, historical vignettes. One guy was named Don Brown, who was the chaplain for the 1st Ranger Battalion, and he parachuted into Grenada with them in 1983. That kind of stuff, right? So proximity principle, really enjoyed that. In fact, I went to a senior chaplain conference last November and was a keynote speaker on that principle, the proximity principle. And then I just got back from Germany 2 weeks ago when I went over and gave a talk at the annual. It's basically all the chaplains that are in Europe and you know, all that part of the world. They all come together for an annual conference, and I was one of the keynote speakers. So it all kind of stemmed from that proximity principle book. The second book was more of a devotional book for men that's based on the Bible and packaged in the Army Ranger ethos. It's simply called A More Elite Man. And that's a takeoff from the Ranger Creed, which is something that all Rangers learn and memorize, where it says recognizing that a Ranger is a more elite soldier. Right. Well, I talked about, you know, the manhood that God wants us to have as men, and, you know, a more elite man instead of a more elite soldier. I pursued that through kind of a hybrid self-publish, traditional publish through a company called Westbow Press. And again, it's still out there. It's very much out there, as a matter of fact. And you know, again, I'm sure you can make that link available
Absolutely.
to your viewers here later on. But that was a great book. And I also worked out a way, because I published that when I was the head chaplain for the Army Ranger School. And so every month, you know, you've got roughly 175, 200 Ranger students that are graduating from Army Ranger School. And one of the things that I would do is I worked out with a publisher where I could get a bunch of complimentary copies, in a sense, and pass those out to the Ranger graduates if they wanted one. So I gave a little briefing a few days before graduation, got all these graduates in the building there at Fort Benning, and in addition to the few of the things that I would share, I would bring a box of 50 books. So every month I'm giving away 50 copies of this book, and they just whoosh, they would run up there and grab their copies. And so it's called A More Elite Man. And again, it's more of a devotional book, how to live your best life, you know, that type of thing. And it's all packaged in that Army Ranger ethos. So for example, I do a chapter that I call Life Navigation. And of course, you know, all soldiers, especially paratroopers and Rangers, are supposed to know how to do land navigation with a compass and a map and so forth. So what I do in that chapter, just as an example, is I pull a lot of the different principles of land navigation in, and I relate them to life. You know, what's your compass? What's your map? You can't possibly navigate your way through life to the high ground if you're only using your internal sense of guidance. You know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The third book was actually about 10 years in the making. And again, each one of these books is totally different. This book is about a famous pastor of a church, and he became famous later on, but in the 1960s and early 1970s, he was the pastor of a church in a place called Merritt Island, Florida, which is right on the east coast of Florida. Merritt Island is actually where the Kennedy Space Center is located. Okay, so think about this. The mid to late 1960s, early 1970s, Kennedy Space Center, Brevard County, Florida. It's the fastest growing county in the country. The Apollo moon program is blowing and going. There's tons of people moving in for that. I mean, they're literally sending men to the moon from Merritt Island. And Merritt Island and Brevard County in those days, the Chamber of Commerce kind of advertised it as Moonport, USA. Moonport, USA, again, because people are going to the moon from the moonport, right? And they advertised it that way all over the place. Well, when this guy, his name was Adrian Rogers, whenever he would go and speak in other places throughout Florida or even across the United States, because he was gaining some notoriety at that time, they would advertise him as the Moonport Pastor. And again, he was just coming into this notoriety at that point, but in the late 70s, throughout the 80s and into the 90s, he became, certainly in the Baptist world anyway, one of the most prominent and I mean, not just prominent in terms of the abilities and so forth, but a man of true integrity. Again, in a day when other pastors and other, you know, guys on television were crashing and burning. I mean, this guy maintained his faithfulness to God, to his wife, to his family, to his church. I mean, truly the real deal in every sense. Anyway, several years ago, God laid it on my heart to tell the story of those years at the Moonport. And I did interviews with all kinds of people who lived there, who knew him. Interviewed his family. I mean, tons of primary source material. I had archives from Texas to North Carolina to Tennessee, because he eventually ended up in Memphis, Tennessee, where he led a very prominent church there. But all that to say, contacted a publisher, and they were very eager to have this story told. And so the story of the Moonport pastor, we released that book last May, so almost a year ago. And of course, it's not going to be a New York Times bestseller. We're not talking Pulitzer Prize here. But the publisher said that they have sold more copies of that book than any other book they've put out.
Wow, congratulations.
And so there's an appetite to know more about this guy named Adrian Rogers. As a matter of fact, as I said, that book only focused on just a relatively small part of his life. I mean, it was a historically significant time, but I didn't even cover his 30 plus years in Memphis. And so now I'm working with the publisher, and I'm basically going to do a full comprehensive biography on this guy for the same publisher. In fact, I spent all day today just diving in. I've got a key interview coming up in a couple weeks, and of course, as I think we all understand, the quality of an interview is largely going to be dictated by the questions and the quality of the questions that you ask. So you really have to have a good handle on your subject matter,
right, yeah,
in order to ask the right questions. I just had another interview with a key guy. He was a seminary president for 23 years. I interviewed him on Monday evening, and we talked for 4 hours.
Wow.
And literally, I ran out of questions, but I think he could have talked another 2 hours, right? So all the research and everything else going into this next book, I mean, I'm pumped up about it. I do consider myself a writer, and I have been to differing degrees, going back literally to elementary school.
Well, let's stay on this writing side of your life. Since Brothers and Sisters Like These, we're about to publish our third book, and what we do is, as listeners know, is try to help veterans heal through the use of writing and creative arts. So please explain how you have witnessed over your years with being a chaplain and writing books, how you can see with the trauma that you've seen as a chaplain, how arts, even singing, dancing, which we do also in religious events, and writing could help from a therapeutic standpoint. Specifically, though, I'll ask for veterans.
Well, that's a great question, man. And, my deal with writing goes back at least to an example that my grandfather set. So my grandfather was a Lutheran pastor, and he passed away back in the mid to late 80s. But from the early 1930s until the mid 1980s, he kept a daily journal every single day of his life. And I have every one of those journals. And I've read through them a couple times. And he was not a guy that used his journals, I think, to process, emotion or whatever. I mean, he was a Germanic dude. He did not have a lot of emotions. But nevertheless, he had this rhythm, this daily rhythm, where he would write in these journals every day. And so way back in 1995, when I was still in the Marines, I started doing the same thing. And so I've got a filing cabinet full of little books that I have written in every single day since 1995. So we're talking 30 years now. And yes, I certainly would like to be able to pass those on to my kids someday, and maybe they'll get something inspiring out of them. But primarily what I've discovered is that is an incredibly healthy life rhythm, right? To be able to just process your day, reflect, write it down, and then even as I go back, so like this last month was the 25th anniversary of my wife and I getting engaged. And I was thoroughly blessed to be able to go back and she and I together kind of read through some of that stuff and say, oh, you remember that? You remember that? Wow, I had forgotten all about that kind of stuff, right? Okay, so fast forward now. I'm on these deployments, right? And I'll mention a name that you remember very well by the name of Chris Mason. And Chris Mason was a paratrooper in Alpha Company 1505, right along with you. And he was killed in November of 2006. And I cannot forget the night. I mean, so many of the sights and sounds of the night that he was killed are so vivid in my mind, almost 20 years later. at the time, I don't know that I really saw writing in those daily books as part of my processing of all of that. But as I look back, I realized that was an integral part of me kind of processing that myself. Now, I will tell you that I never really coached. I mean, I probably talked about it a little bit in terms of sharing with soldiers and so forth to say, hey guys, here's a life habit that I developed many years ago. I write down in books and so forth. I never like packaged that as something to kind of train guys to do, but I can definitely see in my own life how just sitting down and writing stuff out in a book is huge. It's massive on multiple levels, both for the past, the present, and the future. Now, I would say going forward that writing these books has been huge for me in that, part of the definition of leadership in the Army is that leaders provide purpose, direction, and motivation, right? Those are the three words you always hear: purpose, direction, and motivation. And I have found that God has given me a lot of purpose, direction, and motivation in writing these books. And I've got probably 4 or 5 books lined up in a queue that I want to write, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be everybody's story, but I think there's a lot of power. In fact, when I was in Germany, I had a room of about 300 chaplains and chaplain assistants from, PFC all the way up to general officer, right? And I challenged them. I said, and I laid out probably 3 or 4 topics in chaplain history that are easily accessible that any one of them could write about, right? So I challenged them to write, and I challenge people all the time, man. Get a pad, get a pen, get a little notebook, and just develop a rhythm of writing down some of your thoughts, because I'm preaching to the choir here, man. I mean, your listeners are well aware of the power of the written word, whether you're the one writing it or you're reading what someone else has written. And at the same time, I would tell you that I think one of the challenges for people who are dealing with trauma is they live life in the rearview mirror, right? They feel like they can't escape the rearview mirror. But as we think in terms of writing, right, we ask ourselves, okay, what can I write about? What should I write about? And I had a mentor tell me, in fact, this was kind of how I came across this Moonport pastor book, right? He said, this is how you know what to write about. You assess the landscape of what has already been written in a given area. You locate a gap in what is already out there, and then you just drive a truck in that gap and park it there, right? And so, thinking about the life of this very famous pastor, nothing had been written about his years, at the Moonport, in Merritt Island, Florida. And so it just made total sense. Just like this this full biography that I'm doing now, nobody has really written a full biography. I mean, a really detailed work on this guy. But then beyond that, I'm going to go back to the Proximity Principle book. And really, even that book, just because it was written primarily as a thesis, it was not, I didn't have the time or the whatever to really do the full scope of what I want to do. So once I get done with the one I'm working on now, I'm going to go back to the Proximity Principle book. And as I told those chaplains in Europe, I said, I'm going to write the best book on chaplain history that's ever been written, in my humble but very accurate opinion, right? So, there's the reason I bring that up, man, is because I feel like just the writing in terms of what needs to be written, that's keeping me focused on the windshield, not the rear view mirror, right? So, because we can live in the windshield or we can live in the rear view mirror, and God has given me the purpose, direction, and motivation, and I encourage soldiers everywhere to discover that purpose, direction, and motivation for themselves, to live in the windshield rather than the rear view mirror. And I personally believe writing has a big role to play in that.
Thank you, Brother Phil. That's very well said. And I will say personally, from our time in Iraq, for example, when our beloved Sergeant Major Watts passed away, I remember you giving us kind of a debriefing afterwards where you talked about some important memories that we had of him and tried to, in my opinion, change the narrative from maybe the rear view to more of the forward looking. And you'd ask me some, recent combat images that I had of him that were important to me. And I remember one time that Roy Ball, remember Roy Ball, his driver Chewbacca, we call him. I don't remember his actual name anymore. It got shot in the hand through the chest, and then Roy Ball went to go get him, and out comes Sergeant Major right in the middle of this contact, and I'm like trying to stop him to protect him. Then I got our colonel all by himself. But anyway, that was the type of guy he was. And with him passing away, I think it was like the next day or something that we all got our team together and talked to you. I hadn't really been able to think about him in any other way than having just been a casualty of war. But what seared in me from that meeting with us was that image of what a hero he was on that day, that besides me, I don't think too many other people even saw it, because they were all caught up in the moment. Everybody was doing their piece of the pie. But I always looked at chaplains a little differently because of that, because I hadn't had that type of experience post conflict or trauma before. So on a personal level, I thank you personally for that. But I also just am noticing what a difference that kind of intervention, that kind of living out a trauma, whether it's written or even verbal, but that type of processing really made a difference for me immediately. And like I said, I just want to thank you on a personal level for that. You probably
And I appreciate that. And I remember exactly where we were and where we were sitting when we had that little debrief after that incident. But talk about Sergeant Major Watts. Just for you, man. I mean, this may be something that stirred in your heart at some point in time in the future, is to write something about his life, right? I mean, I could definitely help you in locating some of his records that would help you to tell in a little more detail what exactly his life was and where he served and so forth. But that could be something that is laid on your heart, brother.
That's great. Also, that night, not to go too OPSEC on us all here, but the next day, our commanding officer, Colonel Harris, had one engagement to go to, and I was with him versus Watts went out with, what was it, ACO, that night. And that was that was the second time he'd ever gone the wire without me. And obviously none of that's about me, but it's just, I remember it was a poignant concern I had that night, him going out without me, and just the way it happened. I wasn't there, but it's personally always been a touchy subject for me because of a little bit of survivor's guilt and kind of what if and stuff like that. So I do have a very personal connection, intimate connection to him, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I'd never really thought about that, but I've always thought, and you spearheaded the anniversary jump in Florida for him.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show you, I like how you think, and you're definitely an asset to whoever you work for, with, or cross paths with. So I appreciate it. That's a great idea, and I might have to take you up on that.
Yeah, let me know, man. I could definitely point you in the right direction if you wanted to put something together on his life and service. And I think even that would be a tremendous way for you to kind of just pay respects to Sergeant Major Watts, but also for your own heart too.
Yeah, and I think it maybe like we find passion in things that we want to do, and we have passion because we have heart, and so we want to try to do things to better our world, ourselves, and I think he also, simply put, he deserves it. He's a real legend, coming from airborne school as a sergeant major, was he sergeant major? He was a sergeant major airborne school, and then came to us. So, a real legend. Well, Chaplain, brother Phil, sorry. As our time comes to an end here, I would like to offer kind of a call to action, where, my understanding is you're putting new roots in Florida, and at least in a new environment, a new work environment. And I want to offer in Western North Carolina and in the state, with our ties across the state, any way that we can help you in any future, please do. Do not hesitate to reach out to us. I hope I can continue to use you as guidance and as motivation. And
anytime, man.
I look forward to any new books that you have, or any more where we can work together on any type of topic that we might find, as you said, a kind of a gap in the line, and ram a truck down it. I also wanted to just say, personally, I've never been able to really tell you this, but how much I have enjoyed over the years through Facebook and social media, and some of you just seeing your family grow, and from seeing them much, much younger to now just really incredibly like adult, running, working out, handsome, engaged, pretty, just the whole line is like a storybook family. And it really touches my heart to see that, you have such a successful life and family. I've never really told you that, and I thought I'd save it for now. I think as you have had less hair in your life, kind of like me.
That's right.
Your wife and family have aged much better, and that's for both of us, I think, and
Hey man, you know what? My one goal is that my chest. And I remember First Sergeant Pitt said this. He said, "My goal is that my chest sticks out further than my stomach." I said, "That's my goal too, brother."
that's true. And once we don't have hair, that's about all we can wish
That's
for,
right.
I think it's time for a beard. How come you haven't grown a beard? I think that would look pretty nifty.
Honestly, my kids want to know the same thing. And I told my kids, I said, if I let my hair grow out and I grew facial hair, I'd look 10 years older immediately. So I'm trying to remain youthful.
Yeah, when I started this bad boy, I had all black, and then this started to come in. It's been rough.
Yep.
So
Yeah, not going to happen, man. I think the longest I've ever gone in my entire adult life without shaving is about 3 days. I couldn't stand it.
Wow. Well, Brother Phil, it's been an honor and a privilege to cross paths with us, that we cross paths. I find it really amazing and remarkable that after all the crap and stuff we've been through, we're still here. We're repurposed, and we're still functioning and adding and contributing in a positive way to society. And thank you so much for your time. I'd like to leave the last word to our guest always, so Brother Phil, to you the last word.
Well, I just say that God has been very good to me and my family, man. I truly feel like I'm the richest man in the world with the wife that I have, and we have 5 children, and I'm just blessed beyond what I deserve. And so I'm so grateful to God for that, and grateful to you as well, my friend, for allowing me to just to have a little role in your program here. And I pray that your folks are blessed by it. So God bless, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Goodbye to listeners. Stay tuned for the next episode.